I was already doing 90 on the interstate when the second call came through. The first one had been Elena, my daughter, her voice cracking so badly I could barely understand her. "Dad, County Road 12, past the old tobacco barn, please." Then the line went dead. I tried calling back 7 times. Straight to voicemail, every single time. That was 22 minutes ago. 22 minutes of white-knuckle driving through the back roads of rural Georgia, my headlights cutting through fog so thick it looked like the world had been wrapped in gauze. I found her car first. A silver Honda Civic pulled halfway into a ditch, driver's side door still open, the dome light glowing like a weak heartbeat in the mist. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her phone was on the ground outside the car, screen shattered. That explained why my calls weren't going through. I grabbed my flashlight and started shouting her name. The beam swept across dead corn stalks and red clay until it caught something that didn't belong. A shape on the ground, 40 yards from the road, crumpled at the base of an embankment, like she'd been thrown there. My Elena, 27 years old, lying face down in Georgia, mud with blood running from a gash above her left eye, and her right arm twisted underneath her body at an angle that made everything inside me go cold. I dropped beside her and rolled her over as gently as I could. Her eyes were open but unfocused, blinking against the flashlight. When she recognized me, she started crying. Not loud, quiet, broken sobs that shook her whole body. "Who did this to you?" I asked, pulling off my flannel shirt and pressing it against her forehead to slow the bleeding. She grabbed my wrist with her good hand. Her grip was weak but desperate. "Margaret," she whispered. "She sent someone. A man. He ran me off the road, and when I got out, he pushed me down the hill." Her breathing hitched. "She told me last week, Dad. She said I would never give the Prescotts a child. She said my blood would ruin them." My blood. I knew exactly what Margaret Prescott meant by that. Elena's mother, my wife Rosa, was Mexican-American. 3rd generation. Her great-grandparents had crossed the border in 1921 and built a life picking cotton in the Rio Grande Valley before working their way up to owning a small restaurant in San Antonio. Rosa had been the most beautiful woman I'd ever known. She died of breast cancer when Elena was 19, and not a day goes by that I don't see her in our daughter's face. The dark eyes, the warm brown skin, the smile that could make a whole room feel like home. Elena had married Garrett Prescott 2 years ago. The Prescotts were one of those old Savannah families, the kind with a street named after them downtown and a family portrait hanging in the Historical Society. Garrett had seemed decent enough. Quiet, polite, called me sir. I'd had my reservations about the world he came from, but Elena loved him, and I wasn't going to be the father who stood in the way of that. Now my daughter was lying in a ditch telling me his mother had tried to kill her. "Can you move your legs?" I asked. She tried. Her left leg responded. Her right didn't. She screamed when I touched her knee, and I knew it was bad. Dislocated at minimum, broken at worst. "Dad, there's something else." She was shaking now, from cold or shock or both. "I'm pregnant. 9 weeks. I found out last Thursday. I was going to tell Garrett this weekend, but Margaret found the test in our bathroom trash. She must have gone through it while we were at work. She called me yesterday and told me to come to this road tonight. Said she had something important to show me about a surprise she was planning for Garrett's birthday." Elena's voice broke completely. "I'm so stupid." I believed her. I carried my daughter to my truck. She's small, 5'2", 110 pounds, but the walk back to the road felt like it took a lifetime. I drove straight to Memorial Health in Savannah, calling 911 on the way. I told the dispatcher everything. My daughter was attacked. I know who's responsible. Send someone to the hospital. The emergency room team took Elena immediately. Dislocated kneecap, fractured wrist, deep laceration on her forehead requiring 14 stitches, extensive bruising across her back and ribs. But the baby was still there, still holding on. The ultrasound showed a tiny, flickering heartbeat, and I sat in that hallway with my face in my hands and cried for the first time in years. Rosa would have moved heaven and earth to see that heartbeat. While Elena was sedated and resting, I called my brother Dean. He lived 40 minutes away in Statesboro, ran a towing company, knew every sheriff's deputy in 4 counties. I told him what happened. He said 3 words, "I'm coming now." Then I made the decision that changed everything. I drove to Elena and Garrett's house. They lived in a renovated colonial in Ardsley Park, a neighborhood where the houses had names and the hedges were trimmed with rulers. Garrett was in Atlanta for a legal conference. Wouldn't be back until Friday. I knew the garage code because I'd installed the new opener for them 6 months ago. The house was beautiful. Elena had made it beautiful. Fresh flowers on the dining table, photos of the two of them on every shelf, a kitchen that smelled like the cinnamon candles she loved. It made my chest ache looking at it, knowing what had been happening behind all that warmth. I went to Garrett's study. His laptop was on the desk, and I knew his password because Elena had given it to me once when I needed to pull up the invoice for the garage door installation. I opened it and went straight to his email. What I found in that laptop dismantled every good thought I'd ever had about Garrett Prescott. There were folders, organized, labeled, going back over 2 years. The first was called Mother's Concerns. I opened it and started reading. 3 days after Garrett and Elena's engagement, Margaret Prescott had sent her son an email that read, in essence, that she had held her tongue long enough, that this girl was not appropriate for the Prescott family, that the bloodline had been maintained for 9 generations, and she would not see it compromised by someone of mixed heritage. She told Garrett to end the relationship immediately. In exchange, she would fund his bid for a junior partnership at his law firm. Garrett's reply was soft, conciliatory. He told his mother he loved Elena, asked her to give it time, promised that Elena would adapt to the family's expectations. But Margaret didn't give it time. The emails continued, week after week, month after month. She hired a private investigator to look into my family, found Rosa's immigration records from her great-grandparents, and circulated them to family members with a note calling them documentation of the problem. She found Elena's college transcript and mocked her state school education compared to the Prescott tradition of attending the University of Virginia. She compiled a file she called Cultural Incompatibilities that listed things like Elena cooking Mexican food for family dinners, Elena speaking Spanish on the phone with her aunt, Elena suggesting they visit San Antonio for Christmas. Each email from Margaret was longer, more vicious, more specific, and each reply from Garrett was a little more compliant, a little more agreeable. By the end of the first year of marriage, he'd stopped defending Elena entirely. His responses had turned into status updates. She hasn't mentioned visiting her family in 2 months. I told her the firm doesn't allow extended vacations. She stopped making tamales for the neighborhood Christmas party. I told her it wasn't appropriate for the area. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely scroll. My son-in-law had been systematically erasing my daughter's identity for 2 years, reporting his progress to his mother like she was his commanding officer. But then I hit the folder labeled The Problem, and everything got worse. 6 months ago, Elena had started talking about having children. The emails between Garrett and Margaret became frantic. Margaret wrote that under no circumstances could Elena be allowed to conceive, that a mixed-race grandchild would be a permanent stain on the family name, that she would rather see the Prescott line end entirely than see it diluted. Garrett's response made me want to put my fist through the screen. He told his mother he'd been handling it. He'd convinced Elena that they should wait another year. When she pushed back, he started a different approach. He'd been switching her birth control pills, replacing her regular prescription with a lower-dose version he'd gotten through a doctor friend, one that was far less effective at preventing pregnancy, but that he alternated with her real pills on a schedule designed to keep her cycle irregular enough that she'd think she simply wasn't getting pregnant. He'd been tracking her cycle on a spreadsheet, adjusting the switches to minimize the chance of conception while making Elena believe they were actively trying. A spreadsheet. He had a spreadsheet tracking my daughter's body like a science experiment, all to keep his mother happy. But Elena had switched pharmacies 3 months ago, got a consistent supply, and the real pills did what they were supposed to do right up until they helped her conceive the baby she'd wanted so desperately. When Margaret found that positive pregnancy test in the trash, 9 weeks of fury boiled over. The most recent email was from 2 days ago. Margaret to Garrett. It read that the situation had become untenable, that she had spoken with someone named Ray Delacroix, that arrangements had been made, that Elena would be lured to County Road 12 under a pretense, and that the matter would be handled in a way that couldn't be traced back to the family. She instructed Garrett to make sure he was out of town and to establish a clear alibi. She closed the email by telling him that once this was over, they could start fresh. Find him a proper wife. Someone worthy. Garrett had replied with 4 words. Understood. I'll be in Atlanta. I photographed every email, every spreadsheet, every attachment. I found bank records in another folder showing monthly wire transfers from Margaret's personal account to Ray Delacroix, totaling over $40,000 in the past year. I found text message logs that Garrett had backed up to his cloud. Conversations between Margaret and Ray discussing the specific stretch of road, the timing, the method. They'd chosen County Road 12 because there were no streetlights, no houses nearby, and cell reception was weak. They knew Elena would likely survive the car being run off the road, but they expected the embankment drop and the isolation would do the rest. They expected her to lie there all night, maybe longer. They expected her to die. In the bottom drawer of Garrett's desk, I found one more thing. A legal document, drafted but unsigned, prepared by a lawyer I didn't recognize. It was a revised version of the Prescott family trust. The current trust distributed assets equally among all direct descendants. This new version included a clause that any beneficiary who married outside of what it called the established heritage parameters would be automatically disinherited. Margaret had been trying to get this passed through the family's legal structure for months. 3 of the 5 Prescott siblings had already signed it. Garrett was the 4th signature. The heritage parameters, a legal euphemism for keeping the money white. I heard Dean's truck pull into the driveway at just past midnight. My brother walked in, saw my face, and sat down without a word. I turned the laptop toward him and let him read. Dean is 5 years younger than me, built like a refrigerator, and has the shortest fuse of anyone I've ever known. I watched his jaw tighten with every email, watched his knuckles go white, gripping the edge of the desk. When he finished, he looked at me with eyes that were perfectly calm and perfectly furious at the same time. "We're going to bury them," he said. "Legally," I said. "Every way there is," he said. "Here's what we did. First, I called Detective Marcus Williams at the Chatham County Sheriff's Office at 6 in the morning. He met me at the hospital, took my statement, reviewed the evidence on my phone, and his face changed about 4 emails in. He went from professional courtesy to cold, focused anger. He made calls. By noon, warrants were being drawn up for Margaret Prescott and Ray Delacroix. But Dean and I weren't waiting for the legal system to move at its own pace. Dean had a friend named Patricia Owens, an investigative reporter at the Savannah Morning News who'd won awards for her coverage of corruption in local politics. I called her from the hospital parking lot and told her I had a story. Old Savannah money. Attempted murder. Racial hatred hidden behind garden party smiles. I had the emails. I had the bank records. I had everything. Patricia came to the hospital that afternoon. She sat with Elena, who was awake now, bruised and bandaged but lucid and angry. Elena told her everything. 3 years of Margaret's passive-aggressive comments at dinner. The time Margaret introduced Elena to friends as Garrett's little project. The Christmas when Margaret gave every other daughter-in-law jewelry and gave Elena a gift card to a tanning salon with a note that said, "For when you want to even things out." Elena had laughed it off at the time, told herself Margaret was just old-fashioned. She wasn't old-fashioned. She was calculating. Patricia's story ran 2 days later. Front page, above the fold. She'd verified every email, traced every bank transfer, interviewed 3 former employees of the Prescott Real Estate Company who confirmed that Margaret had a pattern of discriminatory behavior. One former office manager described being instructed to reject rental applications from Hispanic tenants. Another described Margaret referring to a mixed-race couple at a company event as an unfortunate pairing. The story hit like a hurricane. The Associated Press picked it up within hours. CNN ran it that evening. By the next morning, it was everywhere. The Prescott name, which had been carved into a bench in Forsyth Park and engraved on a plaque at the Savannah Yacht Club, was now synonymous with racism and attempted murder. Ray Delacroix was arrested at his apartment in Pooler, 20 minutes south of Savannah. He'd been packing a bag. The detective told me later that Ray didn't even make it through the first hour of questioning before he started talking. He told them everything. How Margaret had approached him a year ago, started paying him for odd jobs, then gradually escalated. How she'd promised him $100,000 to make the problem disappear. How he'd followed Elena's car that night, flashed his high beams to force her to pull over, then physically pushed her down the embankment and left. He said Margaret told him Elena was dangerous, that she was trying to steal the family's money, that she was manipulating Garrett. He said he believed it, until he saw the news coverage and realized he'd been the one who was manipulated. Margaret Prescott was arrested at her home on East Gaston Street. She answered the door in a silk robe, holding a glass of white wine. She looked at the officers and said, "There must be some mistake." There wasn't. The footage from the house security camera, which her own home security system recorded, showed her watching the news coverage of her arrest with what the deputy described as genuine bewilderment that anyone cared about what she'd done. Garrett Prescott was picked up at his hotel in Atlanta. He was sitting in the lobby bar, apparently unaware that his world had already collapsed. He was charged with conspiracy to commit assault, criminal interference with medical treatment, and accessory to attempted murder. His law firm issued a statement before he'd even been processed, announcing his immediate termination and expressing deep revulsion at his actions. The Georgia State Bar suspended his license the same day. The trial took place 8 months later. Ray Delacroix pleaded guilty to attempted murder and aggravated assault. He received 18 years in state prison, with no parole eligibility for 12. At sentencing, he apologized to Elena. She sat in the front row of the courtroom, holding our newborn daughter in her arms, and said nothing. She didn't owe him a response. Margaret Prescott went to trial. Her defense attorney tried everything. She was elderly. She was confused. She didn't understand the consequences. The jury saw the emails. They saw the bank transfers. They saw the spreadsheet her son had kept. They deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder. Solicitation of assault. Conspiracy to interfere with medical treatment. The judge, a 71-year-old black man named Judge Roosevelt Simmons, who had lived in Savannah his entire life, sentenced her to 25 years. During sentencing, he said something I'll never forget. He told her that hatred was a choice she had made every single day for decades, and that the court would now make a choice on behalf of the woman she tried to destroy. Margaret's attorney filed an appeal. It was denied. Garrett tried to cooperate. He turned on his mother, testified against her, in exchange for a reduced sentence. The prosecution agreed to drop the accessory to murder charge. He still got 8 years for the conspiracy and the medical tampering. At his sentencing, he tried to address Elena directly. Started to say he was sorry, that his mother had controlled him, that he never wanted anyone to get hurt. Elena's attorney objected. The judge sustained it. Garrett finished his statement looking at the floor. The civil case was where Dean's connections really paid off. We hired a firm out of Atlanta, Wynn and Associates, that specialized in civil rights litigation. They filed suit against Margaret personally, against Garrett, against the Prescott Family Trust, and against Prescott Development Group, the family's real estate company worth an estimated $90 million. They argued that the family business had been used to fund Margaret's activities, that the discriminatory trust revision proved a pattern of institutional racism, and that Elena had suffered physical, emotional, and financial damages. The Prescotts settled before it went to jury. $28 million. The family's East Gaston Street mansion was sold. The yacht club membership was revoked. 3 of the 5 Prescott siblings issued public statements condemning Margaret and distancing themselves from her actions. The 4th, Garrett's older brother Philip, refused to comment. 6 months later, his wife filed for divorce, citing the family's moral bankruptcy. The Prescott name still exists in Savannah. It's still on that park bench and that plaque. But now when people see it, they don't think of old money and heritage. They think of what happens when heritage becomes hatred. That was 2 years ago. Elena gave birth to a healthy baby girl 7 months after the attack. She'd carried that baby through broken bones, through a trial, through the complete destruction of her marriage, and that little girl came into the world screaming loud enough to be heard down the hall. Elena named her Rosa Maria, after her mother and her great-grandmother. When the nurse placed Rosa in my arms for the first time, I looked down at her tiny face, dark hair, brown eyes, and I saw 3 generations of strong women looking back at me. The divorce was finalized before Rosa was 3 months old. Elena didn't want a cent of Garrett's personal money. She had the settlement, and more importantly, she had her freedom. Garrett sends letters from prison. Elena returns them unopened. He's requested visitation rights with Rosa. Elena's attorney is fighting it. As far as we're concerned, Garrett made his choice. He chose his mother's hatred over his wife's life. He doesn't get to choose his way back. Elena and Rosa live in a craftsman bungalow in Beaufort, South Carolina now. It's a small town, quiet, right on the water. I found the house. I renovated it myself over 3 months, rewired the whole thing, built a wraparound porch, installed a swing set in the backyard. Dean helped with the heavy lifting. We spent weekends there all summer, sawdust in our hair, cold beer on the porch railing, Rosa crawling around on a blanket in the yard, while Elena studied for her licensing exam. She passed, by the way. Elena is a licensed clinical social worker now. She runs a practice in Beaufort that specializes in helping women escape abusive family dynamics. Half her clients are referred through the local women's shelter. The other half find her through the website she built, which tells her story and offers resources for people trapped in situations like the one she survived. Last month, she was invited to speak at a conference in Charleston about intimate partner coercion. 300 people in the audience. She didn't use notes. Dean moved to Beaufort too. Said he was tired of Statesboro anyway. But I know the real reason. He wanted to be close to Rosa. That little girl has my brother wrapped around every one of her tiny fingers. He built her a sandbox shaped like a boat, takes her to the farmer's market every Saturday morning. She calls him D, which is as close to Dean as a 2-year-old can manage. And every time she says it, I watch my tough-as-nails brother melt like butter. I'm 64 now. I sold my house in Rincon and moved to Beaufort 6 months ago. I'm 2 streets over from Elena, close enough to walk, far enough to give her space. I still work with my hands because that's who I am. Always have been. But these days, the things I build are smaller. I made Rosa a rocking chair last month, sized just right for her little body, sanded smooth so there wasn't a single rough edge anywhere. I'm working on a dollhouse now. 3 stories, hinged front wall that swings open, tiny furniture I'm carving from scraps of walnut and oak. Rosa stands next to my workbench and watches me with those serious dark eyes, the same eyes her grandmother had, and sometimes she reaches for the sandpaper and tries to help. Last Sunday, we had dinner on Elena's porch. Dean grilled shrimp. Elena made her mother's rice and beans, the recipe Rosa taught her when she was 12. Little Rosa sat in her high chair, smashing avocado into her hair and laughing about it. The sun was going down over the marsh, turning everything gold and pink, and for a moment, nobody said anything. We just sat there, the 4 of us, a family that someone tried to erase and couldn't. I think about Margaret Prescott sometimes, sitting in a prison cell in Claxton, Georgia, surrounded by concrete walls instead of the silk curtains and oil paintings she spent her whole life accumulating. She's 73 now. Her health is declining. Her attorney petitioned for compassionate release last year. The judge denied it. Margaret will most likely die in that cell, and the legacy she murdered to protect is in ruins. Her son is in prison. Her family name is a cautionary tale. The trust she spent decades building was dissolved as part of the settlement. 9 generations of Prescott wealth and reputation gone because one woman couldn't accept that love doesn't care about bloodlines. And the granddaughter she tried to prevent from existing is alive, healthy, and fearless. Rosa Maria took her first steps last month. She walked from the couch to the coffee table, looked back at Elena with an expression of pure triumph, and said her first real sentence. I did it. Yes, baby girl, you did it. You exist. You're here. You're everything Margaret was terrified of, and you're the best thing that ever happened to this family. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry, if I hate the Prescotts for what they did. The honest answer is that I was angry. For a long time, the kind of anger that sits in your chest like a hot coal and won't go out no matter how many deep breaths you take. But anger is expensive. It costs you sleep, health, years. I watched it consume Margaret Prescott until there was nothing left but cruelty and paranoia. I refused to let it do the same to me. What I feel now is something closer to clarity. I understand, in a way I didn't before, that hatred is a disease. It starts small, a comment here, a look there, a quiet conviction that some people are less than others. And if nobody challenges it, it grows. It metastasizes. It turns grandmothers into murderers and husbands into accomplices. Margaret didn't wake up one morning and decide to kill my daughter. She spent 70 years building the framework that made it possible. Every racist joke she laughed at. Every those people she muttered under her breath. Every time she sorted human beings into categories of worthy and unworthy, she was laying another brick in the wall that eventually crushed my daughter underneath it. So, if you're listening to this and you recognize someone in this story, if you have a Margaret in your family, someone who whispers about bloodlines at Thanksgiving, someone who makes comments about your partner's skin or accent or last name, someone who smiles to their face and sends poison behind their back, don't wait. Don't tell yourself it's just how they are. Don't tell yourself it's generational and they'll come around. They won't. Garrett told himself that for 3 years, and it ended with him in a prison cell and his wife in a hospital bed. Confront it. Document it. Protect the people you love. And if the system fails you, make noise until someone listens. Patricia Owens didn't just write an article. She lit a fire that burned down an empire of bigotry. Sometimes that's what it takes. Elena told me something last week that I keep turning over in my head. We were sitting on her porch, watching Rosa chase fireflies in the yard, and she said, "Dad, I used to be ashamed of being mixed, not because of anything you or Mom did, because of the way the world made me feel. Like I had to pick a side. Like I was too Mexican for the white kids, and too white for the Mexican kids. And then I married into a family that confirmed every fear I ever had about not being enough." She paused and watched Rosa stumble and laugh and get back up again. But Rosa's never going to feel that way. Because I'm going to raise her knowing that she's not half of anything. She's all of everything. She's her grandfather's stubbornness, and her grandmother's warmth, and her great-grandmother's resilience, and her own wild, beautiful, unrepeatable self. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me. That's my daughter. That's Rosa's legacy. Not the ashes of a wealthy family's reputation, not the money sitting in a trust account, not the headlines or the courtroom or the prison sentences. The legacy is a little girl catching fireflies on a warm Beaufort evening, completely unaware that she was once the target of a woman who wanted her erased from existence, and completely unbothered by anything except whether she can catch the next blinking light in her hands. I'll keep building things. That's what I do. Houses, porches, rocking chairs, dollhouses, safe places where people can be exactly who they are. Rosa will grow up in a home I built with my own hands, surrounded by people who love every piece of who she is. She'll learn Spanish from her Aunt Carmen in San Antonio. She'll learn to make her grandmother's mole recipe that takes 2 days and dirties every pot in the kitchen. She'll hear the story of her great-great-grandparents who crossed a border with nothing and built a life from scratch. And she'll hear the story of what her mother survived, not as a horror story, but as proof that this family doesn't break. The Prescott name is a footnote now, a case study in law school ethics courses, a reference in articles about hidden racism in American high society. A warning, but the name Rosa Maria, that name is just getting started. And I'll be right here, 2 streets over, building whatever she needs, for as long as these old hands can hold a hammer. That's my story. That's my revenge. Not destruction, but creation. Not answering hatred with hatred, but answering it with a life so full and so bright that the darkness can't touch it.